Okay. Before I tell you this story, Tom, and I am going to tell you this whole story, every single embarrassing, gut-wrenching, oddly beautiful piece of it.
I need you to understand something about me first. I am not a dramatic person. I wear the same 3 oversized sweaters on rotation. My idea of a wild Friday night is finding a new lo-fi playlist and making soup from scratch. I work from home building websites for small businesses, and my most intense daily activity is deciding whether to make chamomile tea or peppermint tea at 2 in the afternoon. I am that person. So, when I tell you that my life turned into something that could only be described as a romantic comedy that slowly, horrifyingly transformed into a dramatic film that then somehow became a healing documentary, I need you to believe me when I say I did not ask for any of this. It started with a lawnmower, a perfectly ordinary lawnmower, pushed by a perfectly unordinary man named Jax. And that is where everything in my quiet, soup-making lo-fi playlist life went absolutely, spectacularly, cosmically sideways. Sit down, get comfortable, maybe make yourself some tea. This is going to take a while. Let me paint you a picture of my husband Leo, as he was before Jax. Leo was, and I say this with full love, and also with the exhaustion of a man who has lived with him for 4 years, Leo was already a lot. He was the kind of man who ironed his pajamas, not because he had to, not because anyone was going to see them, just because. He said wrinkled pajamas felt morally wrong. I stopped questioning it somewhere around year 2. He had a skincare routine that took 45 minutes every night. 5 minutes. I would brush my teeth, wash my face in 30 seconds, climb into bed and be halfway through a chapter of my book, and Leo would still be in the bathroom doing something with a jade roller and whispering affirmations at his reflection. I once asked him what he was saying. He told me he was reminding his pores of their potential. I married this man willingly, happily even. Because beneath all of it, beneath the ironed pajamas and the poor affirmations, Leo was funny and warm, and he used to bring me coffee exactly the way I liked it without me asking. And he'd sit beside me while I coded and just be there, quietly, companionably. That was Leo before. Now, let me tell you about the day everything changed. It was a Tuesday, an aggressively normal Tuesday. I was at my desk in my favorite cream-colored sweater, the big one, the one that goes past my hips, working on a bakery website redesign when I heard it. Vroom! The lawnmower. New neighbor, moving in. Our neighborhood had been quietly buzzing about it for a week. The corner house, the big one with the wraparound porch that had been empty for 6 months, finally had someone in it. I hadn't bothered to look. I was in the middle of a CSS nightmare, and the last thing I needed was neighborly curiosity pulling me away from my screen. But Leo looked. Leo looked, and something in my husband's brain apparently short-circuited so dramatically that I'm surprised I didn't hear a fuse blow from the next room. He came to my office doorway. I remember this so clearly. He came to the doorway and said very quietly, very carefully, like a man trying to hold himself together, "Toady, there's a man outside mowing the lawn without a shirt." I didn't even look up. Good for him. Toby. Leo, I'm working. Toby. Something in his voice made me look up, and my husband, my well-dressed 45-minute skincare routine husband, was standing in the doorway with the expression of a man who had just seen the face of something he did not have a category for. His eyes were slightly wide, his hand was gripping the doorframe. I looked out the window. Okay, fine. I'll give him this much. Jax was a lot. He was tall and broad, and he had the kind of easy confidence that radiates off a person even when they're just doing yard work. He had a nice smile. I could see it even from here, because he'd pause to wave at someone passing by on the street. He looked like someone who had never worried about anything in his entire life, someone for whom everything had just always worked out. I looked at Jax for approximately 4 seconds, acknowledged that yes, he was objectively very good looking, and then looked back at my screen. I said, "He seems nice." Leo didn't say anything. I looked back at the doorway. Leo was gone. I heard, distantly, the sound of him opening the bathroom cabinet. That was the first sign. I didn't recognize it then. I thought he just wanted to freshen up before going to introduce himself to the new neighbor. That's normal. That's a reasonable thing to want to do. What is not reasonable is what I witnessed 40 minutes later. 40 minutes, my friend. I stepped away from my desk to get water, and I nearly walked straight into my husband in the hallway, and I stopped, because the man standing before me was not the same man who had shuffled to my doorway in his weekend house clothes 20 minutes ago. Leo was wearing, and I need you to really hear this, Leo was wearing his three-piece charcoal suit, the one he saves for important client presentations. He had cufflinks in. He had a pocket square. His hair was styled. He smelled like he had bathed directly in a bottle of his most expensive cologne, the one that costs more per milliliter than some people's car payments. I stared at him. He straightened his jacket. "Where are you going?" I asked. "To take out the trash," he said. I want you to understand that we had a trash can full of trash, regular household trash, banana peels and old takeout containers and a paper towel and whatever else. Normal trash. The kind of trash that you take out in whatever you happen to be wearing, possibly including pajamas that have a small coffee stain on the front, because no one cares what you wear to take out the trash. And my husband had put on his three-piece suit for the trash. "Leo," I said. "Are you wearing your interview suit to take out the trash?" He looked at me, very calm, very composed. "I'm also going to wave at the new neighbor." "In your interview suit?" "It's a nice suit." "Leo, you look like you're about to acquire a small company." He smoothed his lapel. "I look presentable." "You look like Gordon Ramsay trying to intimidate a garbage bin." He picked up the trash bag, walked to the front door, opened it with the energy of a man stepping onto a runway. And then, I kid you not, he sneezed. He sneezed so hard he had to grab the door frame. Then he sneezed again. Then he stood there, watering eyes, dignity slightly crumpled, and I realized the cologne. He had sprayed so much of it that he was literally allergic to himself. He straightened up, wiped his eye with the back of his hand, walked out the door. I stood in my hallway in my big cream sweater and my socked feet holding my glass of water, and I thought, that was strange. And then I went back to work. That was my first mistake. I should have paid more attention, but in my defense, we'd been together 4 years. I trusted him, and I genuinely, truly, with my whole soft, introverted heart, did not see what was happening. I just thought he was going through a phase, some kind of sudden renewed interest in his own appearance. I thought vaguely that it was kind of sweet. I was so naive. The suit incident would have been funny enough on its own. A one-time thing, a quirk, a story I'd tell at a dinner party someday and laugh about. Except it didn't stop. The week after Jax moved in, I started noticing a pattern. Every single time Jax was outside, mowing the lawn, washing his car, checking his mail, just existing in the general vicinity of the outdoors, Leo would suddenly find a reason to also be outside. Jax is watering his garden? Leo has discovered a sudden deep passion for checking the structural integrity of our front porch railing, in dress shoes. Jax is washing his car? Leo has remembered, very urgently, that our car also exists and needs to be washed. He does this in a button-down shirt. He doesn't use a sponge. He buffs the hood with the specific cloth we use for Le Creuset pots. Jax is just standing in his yard on a phone call? Leo has decided that this is the exact moment to prune the rosebush. He has never pruned anything in his life. He doesn't know what pruning is. He Googled it for 6 minutes before going outside. He came back inside with a small scratch on his hand and an expression of someone who felt they had successfully communicated something important to the universe. But okay, that's still relatively containable. That's still just a man with a crush behaving like a middle schooler, which, while not entirely comfortable, is technically within the range of human behavior I know how to process. What I was not prepared for was the gym. Leo, my husband who once described exercise as something other people did, Leo joined a gym. Not just joined, he committed. He came home with a gym bag, 2 pairs of expensive athletic shoes, a collection of workout gear that I'm fairly sure cost more than our first month's rent together, and an energy that I can only describe as someone who has just received a mission from a higher power. "We should be healthier," he announced over dinner. "We're fine," I said. I was eating the pasta I'd made from scratch. It had fresh herbs. It was delicious. "We should work on our fitness." "Leo, I went on a walk today, a long one." "That's not the same." "I also did 30 minutes of yoga." "Cardio, Toby. We need cardio." I looked at him. He was eating his pasta, but with the distracted energy of a man whose mind was somewhere else entirely. The gym bag was sitting by the door, new. Tags still on it yesterday, now looking slightly used because he'd apparently been to a class that afternoon. "When did you go?" "After work." "But you got home at the same time." "I went during lunch." "You never go anywhere during lunch." "I do now." He said this with the specific serenity of a man who has convinced himself of his own narrative. And then, I found the protein shakes. An entire shelf in our refrigerator, the shelf where I used to keep the good cheese, the aged Gouda that I order specially, replaced with protein shakes. Labeled and organized by type and flavor. There was a small whiteboard stuck to the fridge that said workout schedule with checkboxes. I stood in front of the open refrigerator for a solid 15 seconds. "Where's my Gouda?" I called. The protein-to-fat ratio wasn't... "Leo?" "It's in the drawer." "Why is it in the drawer?" "The shakes need to be visible, so I remember to drink them." "The shakes need to be visible." I closed the refrigerator. I pressed my hand flat against it. I took a breath. "Leo, are you okay?" "Never better," he said from the living room, where I could now see he was doing something on his phone. I walked in. He was watching a tutorial, a form tutorial for bench pressing. He saw me see it. He did not minimize the video. "Do you know what your problem is, Toby?" he said in a tone that was entirely too casual. "I have problems?" "You don't challenge yourself enough. You work come home, you make soup, you wear the same sweaters." "I like my sweaters." "You don't push yourself." I looked at him for a long moment. Something small and uncomfortable moved in my chest. I didn't name it then. I just nodded and said, "Okay," and went back to my office and put my headphones on. I should have named it then. But you want to hear the most hilariously unhinged part? The part that genuinely made me laugh out loud, alone, in my office at 11 o'clock at night? The kind of laughing where you're not entirely sure if you're also crying a little? The teeth brushing. Leo had always been good about dental hygiene, reasonable, morning and night like a normal human. But somewhere in week 3 of the Jax era, I started noticing that Leo was brushing his teeth with a frequency that was beginning to concern me from a purely enamel preservation standpoint. After breakfast, after lunch, after his afternoon coffee, which, by the way, he had switched from his usual dark roast to something called whitening coffee, which cost 4 times as much and tasted like regret. One morning, I counted. I was sitting at my desk and I counted 3 separate trips to the bathroom before noon, each one accompanied by the sound of vigorous brushing. I knocked on the bathroom door. "Leo?" "1 second." "Are you brushing your teeth again?" A pause. Spitting. Running water. "I had a snack." "What did you eat?" "Air." I genuinely burst out laughing at that, just dissolved into it, standing in the hallway in my socks, laughing at my husband who was brushing his teeth for the 4th time before noon because he ate air. And for a moment, just a moment, it was just funny. It was just my ridiculous, vain, completely unhinged with a crush husband doing ridiculous things, and I laughed, and I thought, okay. This is a phase. He'll get it out of his system. He did not get it out of his system. He signed up for a whitening treatment at the dentist. He started buying those whitening strips you wear for 20 minutes, and he'd sit on the couch wearing them and talking to me in a very particular way. Mouth slightly open, lips carefully positioned, like a man trying to simultaneously have a conversation and star in a toothpaste commercial. I understood roughly 60% of what he said during these periods. I became very good at nodding. He also, and this one really deserves its own moment, he also researched what cologne Jax wore. He had somehow worked out via some absolutely impressive detective work that I refused to ask too many questions about that Jax used a specific cedar and sandalwood cologne, and Leo, who had a collection of at least 12 expensive fragrances already, went out and bought that specific cologne. He wore it once, sneezed aggressively for 6 minutes, deemed it not ideal for his chemistry, and returned to his regular fragrance. But he had tried. He had genuinely, earnestly tried to smell like someone else for the love of a man who didn't know he existed yet. And through all of this, through the suits and the gym bag and the whitening strips and the protein shakes and the cologne sneezing, I was right here, in my big sweater, making soup, building websites, leaving mugs of tea on Leo's desk because I still noticed when he'd been staring at his laptop too long. I kept making dinner for 2. I kept saving the spot beside me on the couch. I kept laughing at the ridiculous things because what else was I going to do? I loved him. I'd loved him for 4 years. I thought the phase would end. I thought he'd come back to the couch, to the soup, to me. I was wrong. I need to stop here for a second. I need to breathe. Because this next part, I've told this story in pieces, to different people, in different ways. To my sister on the phone at 2 in the morning, to my best friend over tea when she drove 4 hours just to sit with me. And even now, even after everything that came after, even knowing how the story ends, this part still sits in my chest like a stone. Our 5th anniversary was in April. I'd been planning it quietly since January. I'd found this watch. Leo had mentioned it once, just once, in passing, the way he sometimes did when something caught his attention. He'd seen it in a magazine, some classic design, beautiful face, leather band, the kind of thing that would look perfect on his wrist during those presentations he loved so much. He'd said, someday, maybe, the way people say things they've half given up on. I saved for 3 months. I skipped my own small luxuries, the specialty teas, a new book I'd been eyeing, a sweater I'd seen online that I'd kept in my cart for so long it was practically a pet. I quietly, carefully, happily saved. And in March, I ordered it. Had it engraved on the back, picked it up myself, wrapped it at my desk while Leo was at work, using the gold ribbon because he loves gold. I hid it in the bottom of my sweater drawer because I knew he never went in there. He'd made it very clear over the years that the sweater situation was, in his words, your domain. I was in a meeting, well, a virtual meeting, me and a client talking through a new page layout, when I knocked my water glass. Nothing dramatic, just a small spill, and I jumped up to grab a cloth and I yanked open my sweater drawer, and the cloth wasn't in there, obviously. I'd just reacted on instinct. And I looked down and the box was gone. The box with the watch, the gold ribbon, the receipt, all of it. I stood very still. I closed the drawer. I sat back down. I apologized to my client. I finished the meeting. And then I sat in my office chair and I thought, very carefully, through several possible explanations. Maybe he'd found it and moved it somewhere else. Maybe he'd discovered it by accident and was keeping it safe. Maybe there was a reason that was fine and reasonable and okay. I went to find him. He wasn't home yet. It was a Saturday, which meant he'd gone to the gym. The Jax gym. The one right next to the park where I had since quietly worked out. Jax sometimes jogged on Saturday mornings. I waited. And while I waited, I did something I hadn't done in a while. I just sat in the living room, quietly, without my laptop or my headphones, just sat and listened to the house and looked at the photos on the shelf. Us at the beach 3 years ago, both of us laughing at something, him holding my hand, and I felt something I didn't want to name yet, something cold and shapeless sitting at the back of my throat. He came home around noon. He wasn't alone. Not what you think, nothing like that. He came home with Jax. They'd apparently run into each other at the gym, which, with everything I now know, run into each other is doing enormous heavy lifting as a phrase, and Leo had invited him over for coffee. So, I was sitting in my living room when my husband walked in with the man he had been arranging his entire external existence around for the past 2 months. Jax was exactly as I'd expected from a distance. Nice. Genuinely, simply nice. Easy smile, relaxed posture, the kind of person who makes himself at home without making you uncomfortable. He shook my hand, said, "So you're the one Leo talks about at the gym?" And I smiled and I said, "Yes, I suppose I am." And something about the way Leo laughed, quick, small, dismissive, made that cold, shapeless thing in my throat grow slightly larger. And then Jax reached for his coffee cup, and his sleeve shifted. And I saw it. The watch. My watch. The one I saved for since January, the one with the engraving on the back that said always, T, on Jax's wrist. Not Leo's, Jax's. I didn't say anything. I don't know how I didn't say anything. I don't know where that stillness came from. I'm not normally a confrontational person. I'm the person who apologizes to furniture I walk into. I'm that person. But in that moment, some very quiet and very serious part of me just went still. I sat through the rest of that coffee. I answered questions. I smiled at the right moments. And when Jax said he had to get going, I shook his hand again, and I watched him leave. And I waited until I heard his door close across the yard. And then I looked at my husband. "Leo," I said, "where's the watch?" He was carrying cups to the kitchen. He paused. Just for a moment. Very small. Most people wouldn't catch it. I caught it. "What watch?" "The one from my sweater drawer." He set the cups down. He turned around. And for a second, just a second, I saw something cross his face that looked almost like shame. And I thought, okay, here it is. Here's the part where he explains, where there's something I'm misunderstanding. But then the expression shifted. Something closed off behind his eyes. And when he spoke again, his voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. Cold and perfectly tailored, like a suit worn for the wrong occasion. He said, "I found it. I thought it was something you bought for me." It was. But it wasn't really. He paused, recalibrated. "Jax admired the design. I didn't think you'd mind." "I didn't think you'd mind." "You gave away my anniversary gift," I said, very quietly. "The one I saved 3 months for, to the neighbor." "It wasn't a big deal, Toby." "It had your name on it. It had—" My voice caught, just barely. I pressed it flat. "It was engraved." He looked at me for a long moment, and then, I don't know what was going on in his head in that moment. I genuinely don't. Maybe he was embarrassed and couldn't handle it. Maybe he was so deep in whatever this thing with Jax was that he'd lost some essential part of his judgment. Maybe he was just not the person I thought I'd married, and I'd just never seen it clearly until right now. Whatever it was, what came out of his mouth next was not an apology. "You know," he said, tone shifting into something careful and distant and somehow casual, like he was observing a problem that didn't quite belong to him. "You could put in more effort, Toby. Jax, he takes care of himself. He's disciplined, he's put together, and you're—" He gestured, vaguely, at me, at my big sweater, my socked feet, my absence of a gym bag or a three-piece suit or a whitening strip-optimized smile. "I'm what?" I asked. He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, but not enough to stop. "You're just very comfortable. All the time. You're so comfortable." I want to describe what happened in my chest in that moment, but I'm not sure I have the words for it exactly. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't a sharp pain. It was more like, you know that feeling when something you thought was solid slowly turns out to be hollow? When you press on it and realize there's nothing behind the surface? That. "So that's it," I said. "I'm too comfortable." "I just think you gave his name engraved gift to someone else, and I'm the one with the problem?" "I didn't say problem." "Leo." My voice was very quiet, very level, the kind of quiet that is not calm, but is instead the surface of something deep and cold. "I have worked from home, and I have made you dinner, and I have laughed at the ridiculous things, and I have given you all the patience I have. I have left tea on your desk. I have saved for months for something because I remembered you mentioning it once, and you gave it away." He opened his mouth. "To impress a man," I said, "who doesn't even know why the watch is significant, who has no idea it says your name on it." Silence. He closed his mouth, and I walked to my room, and I closed the door very quietly, because slamming it would have felt like performing grief for an audience, and what I was feeling was not for an audience. What I was feeling was mine, and I was going to carry it myself, quietly, the way I carry most things. I sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at my hands. I thought about the photos on the shelf in the living room, the beach, the laughing, the held hands. And then I pulled my sweater sleeves down over my hands, the way I always do when I need something to hold on to, and I let myself cry, quietly, just for a little while. I started packing 2 days later. I didn't make a production of it. I didn't need him to witness it or react to it or have feelings about it. I borrowed my sister's car. I took my clothes and my laptop and my good tea and the small plant I'd grown from a cutting, and I left. And I remember right before I walked out the door, I looked back at the kitchen once, at the stove, at the spot where I had stood almost every evening for 4 years, making something warm and real from scratch. I hope he eats well, I thought. I hope someone feeds him properly. And then I left. My sister's apartment smelled like lavender and old books. She had a cat named Biscuit who immediately, with zero hesitation, sat on my feet the first night I was there, as if he could sense the specific location of my sadness and decided that that was where he was needed. He worked from her spare room for 3 weeks. I built a small business website for a pottery studio. I redesigned a homepage for a children's bookshop. I wore my sweaters. I made soup. Here is the thing about heartbreak that nobody tells you clearly enough. It doesn't always announce itself as devastation. Sometimes it just feels like tiredness. Like you've been holding your breath for so long that when you finally stop, you can't quite remember how normal breathing feels. I was tired. So deeply, quietly tired. But I was also, and this surprised me, a little bit relieved. Like I'd been walking around carrying something heavy for so long that I'd stopped noticing it was heavy, and the moment I set it down, I felt the absence of the weight so acutely that it almost made me lightheaded. My sister was very good at not pushing me. She'd bring me tea and sit nearby and ask very small questions, like, "Did you eat today?" And "Do you want to watch something?" And "Biscuit is being weird again. Do you want to come see?" And I loved her for it. But she also said at the end of week 3 in the gentlest possible way, "Toby, sweetheart, I think you should go outside." I go outside. To the corner store and back doesn't count. It's a very satisfying corner store trip. Toby. So I went outside. I found a small street market, the kind with canvas tents and handmade things and the specific low-grade chaos of people who genuinely love what they sell. I walked slowly with my hands in my sweater pocket, the big olive green one, my favorite, the one that goes down past my hips. And I felt the spring air, and I looked at things without purpose, which is a different kind of looking, a softer kind. And then I found the flower stall. It was tucked at the end of a row, and it smelled like every good thing green and sweet and faintly cool, the way the air smells just before it rains. There were buckets of flowers everywhere in that organized chaos way that somehow made it all more beautiful. Wildflowers bundled in brown paper, small topiaries in terracotta pots, a chalkboard with the day's specials written in slightly crooked handwriting. I wasn't going to stop. I didn't need flowers. But I stopped. And the man behind the table looked up. His name was Luca. He had soft eyes, the kind that crinkle at the corners before the smile reaches his mouth, which meant you saw the warmth coming before it arrived, which somehow made it even warmer. He was wearing a canvas apron over a worn flannel shirt, and he had a small streak of soil on his left wrist. And he was holding a bundle of sweet peas in his hands the way you hold something fragile and worthy of care. He said, "Hi, are you looking for something specific or just looking?" And I said, "Honestly, just looking." And he smiled that smile with the pre-smile in the eyes. And he said, "Those are the best kind of customers. No pressure. Take your time." I looked at the flowers for a while. He didn't hover. He went back to what he was doing, arranging, trimming, tying, and let me be. And that absence of pressure, that simple, respectful quietness did something unexpected to my chest. It loosened something. After a few minutes, I picked up a bundle of sweet peas, small purple and white ones. "How much for these?" He told me it was a fair price. And then he leaned slightly forward and said, with a kind of puzzled but completely earnest expression, "Can I ask you something weird?" I looked up. "Sure." "What do you use? You smell really nice, like clean, like fresh linen and maybe something herbal. It's not cologne, is it?" I blinked. "It's probably my laundry detergent," I said, "and maybe the chamomile. I drink a lot of chamomile." He nodded, as if this was entirely satisfying information. "I like it," he said simply. "Most people smell like they're trying to announce themselves. You smell like somewhere you'd want to stay." I didn't know what to do with that. I genuinely had no protocol for someone saying something like that to me in the middle of a flower market on a Tuesday. I said, "Thank you." He said his name was Luca. I told him mine was Toby. And then I paid for my sweet peas and walked home, my sister's home, with flowers I didn't need, and a strange, warm feeling in my chest that I also hadn't planned on. I went back the following week. I told myself it was for more flowers. My sister did not believe me. Biscuit watched me leave with a knowing expression that I found offensive coming from a cat. Luca remembered my name. Not in the way people sometimes remember your name because they're trying to seem attentive. He just said it, naturally, when he saw me, like it had simply already been in the space he kept near at hand. "Toby, the sweet peas woman. Person. Sorry, the sweet peas person." "Person is fine," I said. "They're doing really well, actually." "The sweet peas. I put them in a blue vase, and they look very dramatic against the wall." He looked pleased. "Blue. Good choice. They needed something to contrast against." That's what I thought. And just like that, effortlessly, without any of the careful maneuvering I used to feel around Leo near the end, we were talking about flowers and color theory and whether certain plants have personalities. His position, yes, absolutely, and his evidence was extensive. About what I did for work and what that was like, and if I ever felt lonely or if the quiet was the point. "The quiet is the point," I said, and meant it, in a way I hadn't been able to articulate in a long time. I don't need noise. I don't need to be performing comfortability. I just need to feel like where I am is actually mine. He looked at me for a moment. "That makes a lot of sense," he said, very simply, like it wasn't complicated or unusual, just sensible. And here's the thing. Here's the small and enormous thing I want to tell you about Luca. He never once made me feel like I was too much of one thing, Too quiet, too soft, too comfortable, too sweater-heavy and soup-making and lo-fi playlist. He never made a face when I mentioned my routine or raised an eyebrow at what I wore or suggested in that very casual, very cutting way that Leo had developed that I could try harder at existing. He just liked me, specifically, the way I actually was. Once, he met me at the market on a cold Saturday when I was wearing the cream sweater, the big one that Leo had once said made me look like I'd given up, and Luca had said, unprompted, not even in the context of a compliment, just as a genuine passing observation. That sweater looks really cozy. I think if I were a sweater, that's the sweater I'd want to be. I laughed hard at that. Real laughter. From somewhere underneath all the tired and all the careful. And he laughed too, a little surprised by the size of my reaction, and said, "Was that a weird thing to say?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely, I loved it." And that was somehow the moment that I knew quietly, with certainty, that something very good was beginning. We moved slowly, intentionally. He asked if I wanted to get coffee one afternoon, casually, with a slightly nervous edge to it that I found deeply endearing in a man who was otherwise quite settled in himself. I said yes. We walked to a small place 2 streets from the market and sat for 2 hours, and the conversation never ran out, not once. He held the door open. He asked what I wanted to order instead of assuming. When I talked, he listened. Not waited for his turn to talk listened, but actually taking it in listened. The kind where you can see the information landing in real time in someone's eyes. When he walked me back to my sister's building, he stood on the bottom step, and we were suddenly at the same height, and he said, "I'd like to do this again. Soon, if possible. No pressure, but I mean, yes, pressure. I'm choosing to apply some pressure." I laughed again. "Yes," I said. "Pressure accepted." And slowly, over coffee visits and Saturday markets and a few home-cooked meals, which he ate with the specific reverence of someone who genuinely understands what it means when a person cooks for you slowly, something in me that had been pulled very tight began to ease. I stopped bracing for the comment that made me smaller. I stopped measuring the space between us for signs of distraction. I started just being there, being present, being Toby, in my big sweaters and my socked feet and my chamomile tea, without apology or performance. Luca once reached over when we were sitting on my sister's tiny balcony, watching the evening come in and tucked a loose piece of my hair behind my ear, very gently, the way you handle something you consider worth being careful with. And then he went back to his tea like it was nothing, like tenderness was just his default, like he didn't know how to be otherwise. My heart was racing. I was trying to be very casual about my heart racing. "You're very soft," he said. Not like a criticism, like an observation he was deeply satisfied with. "Is that okay?" I asked. He looked at me like the question was the most unnecessary thing he'd ever heard. "It's my favorite thing," he said. I cried later that night. Not out of sadness, just release. The way you exhale properly after holding your breath so long you forgot that this is what air actually feels like. Now, I promised you a full story, and a full story means I have to tell you what happened after. My sister has a friend who works in Leo's building. I am not proud of how much of the following information I have absorbed through this chain of communication, but here we are, and I'm going to tell you all of it because you have earned it. Leo and Jax became close, official even, for about 2 months. And at first, apparently, according to my sister's friend who witnessed far too much of this, Leo was thrilled. He was living in the version of events he had been engineering since the day that lawnmower first started. He had the polished man, he had the gym dates and the crisp mornings, and the partner who matched his 3-piece suit energy with an ease that Leo had been so in awe of. And that is when Leo discovered something very important about living the life you've been glamorizing from across the yard. The view is very different up close. Jax was a fundamentally nice person. I want to be clear about that. He didn't do anything wrong, he just was who he was. And who he was someone who lived by a very particular set of standards. Standards that look excellent from the outside, and that are apparently considerably more demanding to actually live inside of. Jax was up at 5, every day. 5 in the morning. Gym by 5:30. Precise nutrition, precise schedule. His refrigerator made our old refrigerator with the protein shake shelf look casual. There were containers with labels, a meal prep system that was genuinely impressive, and also, Leo would later describe, a little terrifying. He didn't watch television. He had opinions on passive consumption of media. He tracked his sleep. He meditated, which is wonderful. Meditation is wonderful, but according to my source, it was a very specific kind of meditation that required complete silence in the home at 7 a.m., which Leo, who was used to making noise whenever he wanted in his own space, found significantly challenging. He didn't cook, not because he couldn't, but because his nutrition plan didn't allow for the variables that come with improvised cooking, which meant no more pasta made from scratch, no more Sunday soups, no more coming home to the smell of something warm on the stove made by a person who thought about what you might feel like eating today. Dinner was, most evenings, precisely measured, precisely prepared, and nutritionally perfect. And lonely in a way that precise measurements cannot fix. I heard secondhand that Leo made dinner once, tried to. He'd apparently gone out of his way to buy ingredients, find a recipe, and actually cook something in Jax's impeccably organized kitchen. He made pasta. Not the good kind, not the scratch kind, but he tried. And Jax had sat down, looked at it, and gently explained in the most well-intentioned way that the pasta would put him well over his carbohydrate intake for the week, and he had the meal prep containers in the fridge if Leo wanted those instead. Leo ate the pasta alone. And one evening, according to my sister's very comprehensive grapevine, Leo was sitting at Jax's kitchen table while Jax was on a conference call. An hour-long conference, very important, very focused. Jax very much fully present in his professional life. And Leo looked around at the clean, precise, perfectly maintained apartment, and he thought, apparently, about soup. Just soup. The way the apartment would smell when I had something going on the stove. The particular quality of warmth it created, the way the smell would find you even in another room and feel like being told you were expected and welcome. He thought about the lo-fi music that I'd have playing quietly, about sitting down at a table where the meal had been made for him specifically, because someone had thought about him and what he might like. He thought about the sweater drawer, about the gift receipt, about the engraving that said always-T. And my sister, who had been furious on my behalf for months, and who had therefore not been above sending Leo exactly one text, just one at what she calculated to be his most reflective moment, simply sent him, "He's doing really well, by the way." No context, no explanation, just that. And Leo read it, and he didn't respond. And 3 minutes later, my sister's friend, who is a menace and I adore her, reported that Leo had gone very quiet for the rest of the evening. I'm not telling you this to celebrate his regret. I want to be honest with you about that. Whatever satisfaction I might have expected from knowing he was struggling, it was quieter than I thought it would be, smaller. Because by the time I heard all of this, I was already so far past the place where his feelings about our story took up the most space in mine. I was sitting in a small, warm kitchen that Luca had made into something wonderful, with sweet peas in a blue vase on the windowsill and good tea in my hands, and Luca across the table from me, laughing about something, doing that thing where the warmth reaches his eyes before it reaches his mouth. And I thought, I don't need him to regret it. I've already moved somewhere the regret can't reach. Leo sent me a message eventually, a long one. I read it once, slowly and carefully the way I do most things. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know what he'd been thinking, but that he thought it was something about fear, about getting comfortable and being afraid that comfortable was the same thing as being forgotten. He said the thing about my appearance, the comfortable comment, was one of the ugliest things he'd ever said, and he knew it even as he was saying it, and he'd been ashamed of it every day since. He said, I think I confused the life I thought I was supposed to want with the life I actually had. and I lost the actual life trying to have the supposed to one. I won't tell you what I wrote back. That's between him and me. But I will tell you that I didn't write it in anger, and I didn't write it to wound him, and I didn't write it quickly. Because here is what I know now on this side of all of it. Comfort is not settling. Softness is not weakness. The life I was living, the lo-fi playlists and the scratch-made soup and the big sweaters and the quiet mornings, that life was not a failure. It was not something to be outgrown or escaped or improved upon for someone else's benefit. It was real. It was mine. It was good. And the person who belongs in that life is the person who sees it and says, I want to be somewhere I can stay. Last Saturday, Luca came over to my new apartment. Mine, just mine, the one I moved into 2 months ago, with a good stove and a big window and a wall I've been slowly filling with plants. And he brought flowers, obviously, he always brings flowers, a mix of things that shouldn't work together but somehow do. He stood in my kitchen while I made dinner, and he leaned against the counter and talked, unhurried, about his week, about a particular customer at the market who'd been very emotional about a specific variety of dahlia, about whether he thought my spider plant was judging us. I think it's judging you. I've given it no reason to judge me. It's always the innocent-looking ones, he said. I laughed, and the kitchen smelled like something warm, and there was lo-fi music playing from the small speaker on the shelf, and the sweet peas were in the blue vase on the windowsill, and it just felt like everything exactly where it was supposed to be. No performance, no trying, no checking whether I was enough of something or too much of something else. Just Toby, in his big sweater, in his kitchen, making food for someone who would eat it with both hands and real gratitude and call it the best thing he'd tasted all week. So, that's the story. That's the whole story of how a lawnmower, a 3-piece suit, a pair of whitening strips, an anniversary watch, and a bunch of sweet peas in a blue vase led me from the person I was trying to be for someone else all the way back to the person I actually am. If you're somewhere in the middle of it right now, if you're the person in the big sweater feeling small, wondering if comfortable means forgettable, if soft means invisible, if the quiet life you love means something is wrong with you, it doesn't. It just means your person hasn't found the right flower stall yet. Hold on. Make your soup. Wear the sweater. Someone is going to lean across a table and tell you you smell like somewhere they want to stay. And you'll understand then what I understand now. You weren't too much. You were just always meant for someone who knew what to do with something real. The end.